Greetings again, and welcome to the third and final part of the Histology of Skeletal Muscle lecture. What we're going to be looking at is the arrangement of the skeletal muscle structures in order to give us the final muscles that are found in the body. Okay, so we're going to look at the organization of skeletal muscle. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take it from the smallest structure. So we're going to go from the inside, and then we're going to work our way out until we reach the big muscle. Okay, so the first structure that you need to know is what we call a muscle fiber. Okay, now in this picture we're looking at a cross section of a skeletal muscle, and you can see here that it has a tendon and it's attached to a bone, so it's a skeletal muscle. Okay, now the smallest structure that we find inside the skeletal muscle is what we call a muscle fiber. Now, a muscle fiber is a skeletal muscle cell, so it's the smallest structure that's found in the muscle, and it is called the muscle fiber. And each muscle fiber is going to be surrounded by a layer of connective tissue, okay, which is generally very thin. And this layer is called the endomysium. So basically, if I take a single muscle fiber, this is going to be one skeletal muscle cell, and I'm going to find that it's surrounded by a layer of connective tissue, which is very thin, and that layer is called the endomysium. So, we've already seen what sarcomeres look like, and we said that sarcomeres or multiple sarcomeres arranged together give me a muscle cell. One skeletal muscle cell is called a muscle fiber, which we saw in the picture. And these generally vary in length according to location. So, for example, you've got muscles in the thigh region of the lower limb are going to be very long. But then if you, for example, look at the muscles of the foot or the muscles of the hand, they're going to be very short. Now, generally, because it's a cell, that means that it has all the other regular features of a cell. It's got the cytoplasm, it's got the organelles, it's got so forth, but we just give them specific names because they have such a specific structure. So the cytoplasm of a muscle fiber is usually referred to as the sarcoplasm. The sacrolemma is the cell membrane of the muscle fiber. So like I said, it has all the same structures of a regular cell. They're just given different names. And the endoplasmic reticulum, where the proteins are synthesized, is called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Now, under the microscope, remember that muscle fibers appear striated because of the presence of sarcomeres, and we said earlier that they have multiple peripherally arranged nuclei. And I already mentioned that each muscle fiber is going to be surrounded by a thin layer of connective tissue, and we refer to that as the endomysium. So the line that forms the outer circumference of the muscle fiber, that is the endomysium. So each muscle fiber separately is surrounded by a thin connective tissue sheath, which is called the endomysium. This layer is thin and is thin enough to allow the terminal nerve endings and capillaries to reach the muscle fibers. So if you remember when we talked about the blood vessels in the cardiovascular system, we spoke about how in order for blood vessels to reach the cellular parts of an organ, they need to divide into smaller blood vessels. So the artery will become an arteriole, and then you've got the capillaries, and the capillaries are the ones that reach the innermost part of the organ. So since the muscle fiber is surrounded by a connective tissue layer, this connective tissue layer needs to be thin enough in order to allow those capillaries to reach the muscle fiber. And obviously this is important for metabolic exchange and metabolic processes. Okay? Now, what happens next is that I'm going to have multiple muscle fibers grouped together. Okay? So if you look inside the muscle, you'll notice that it is divided into subsegments, and each segment is made up of multiple muscle fibers grouped together. When you have multiple muscle fibers grouped together, this is referred to either as a fascicle or a bundle. Okay, so both names are interchangeable. You can use either one. They mean the same thing. And similarly, each muscle bundle is going to be surrounded by a layer of connective tissue. So all those muscle fibers need to be held together so that they can stay in place and maintain their structure. So they're going to be surrounded by another layer of connective tissue, and we're going to call that the perimysium. So you can see here, you've got multiple muscle fibers, and they're held together by a surrounding connective tissue layer, which is called the perimysium. So a group of fibers held together gives me a muscle fascicle or a muscle bundle. It's the same thing. And a thicker layer of connective tissue. So when I say thicker, I mean thicker than the endomysium. Okay, so it's a thicker layer of connective tissue, and it's usually made of collagen, surrounds a muscle fascicle, and this is called the perimysium. So each muscle fascicle is surrounded by the perimysium. This layer also has blood vessels and nerve fibers, similar to the endomysium, but the difference is that they are larger in size. So basically think of it as this is the stage before the capillaries. So remember you had arteries, arterioles, and then capillaries. So this is roughly the stage of the arterioles. Okay, and then what's going to happen is you're going to have multiple muscle fascicles. So this is one fascicle, this is another, each one surrounded by its perimysium. We group them together, and then they are going to be surrounded by another layer of connective tissue, which is going to be called the epimysium. So when you group multiple fascicles together, you end up forming the muscle. And then the connective tissue layer that surrounds them is called the epimysium. So a collection of fascicles make up a muscle, and they are held together by dense connective tissue called the epimysium. And the epimysium is going to contain the large neurovascular bundle that reaches the muscle. So when you see the muscles in the on the cadaver in the dissection room, and then you see like the large blood vessels that are branching directly from the aorta or wherever, okay, those muscles are going to be found in the epimysium, okay, and then they divide into smaller arteries or arterioles, and those are going to be found in the perimysium, and then the capillaries are going to be found in the endomysium. So just basically think of it that each structure that makes up the muscle is going to be surrounded by a layer of connective tissue that holds them together, and then each connective tissue layer it has a specific part of the blood supply and nerves that is found within it. The more superficial it is, as in the more, or actually, let's say the larger it is, okay, the larger the blood vessel that's going to be found with it. So I'm going to have the main artery with the epimysium on the outside. I'm going to have the smaller arteriole with the with the perimysium, and then we're going to have the capillaries with the endomysium. So each one needs to have its specific structure. Okay, so in summary, hopefully if you've watched the first two videos as well, okay, skeletal muscle is any muscle that is attached to bone and is responsible for causing movement. That's just a general definition, or search. Yeah, just a general definition. Okay, but remember, it's dependent on which part of the skeleton it's attached to. It has specific characteristics such as being excitable, contractile, elastic, and voluntary. Make sure you know the definitions of each characteristic. The basic functional or contractile unit of skeletal muscles are called sarcomeres. These are made of proteins. Remember, you had thick filaments, thin filaments, actin and myosin, and you had the regulatory or accessory proteins. And muscles are generally made of fibers, which are the skeletal muscle cells, and then each bundle is going to be surrounded by a specific connective tissue layer. And that wraps up the third part of this lecture and is the conclusion of this entire topic. I hope this video series was useful for you and that the concepts were clear. And as always, I will be available for questions if you need them. So thank you for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon.